The ship landed on the colony world with a low, heavy hum that shook the ground beneath the waiting crowd. People gathered near the docks, craning their necks to see who would step out this time. Mail-order brides and husbands were not new here. It had become a small tradition in this distant outpost far away from Earth and other great cities. Life in the colony was harsh, full of long hours, rocky land, and silence that could eat into a person's soul. Companionship was not just wanted, it was needed. Among the passengers that day was a human woman. Her name was Lyra. She walked carefully down the ramp, clutching a wooden box tightly against her chest. Her steps were light, but her grip on the box was so firm that her knuckles turned white. Unlike others who smiled nervously or waved to their waiting partners, she kept her head low. Her long, dark hair fell around her face, shielding her expression. She looked small, fragile, like someone carrying more than her body could bear. Waiting for her was Tarek, a miner from the colony. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough hands and tired eyes. Life in the mines had left him strong, but scarred. He had signed up for the program not out of desperation but out of loneliness. The rocks never spoke back. The silence of his home was too heavy. He thought a partner might bring light into the dark corners of his life. When he saw Lyra, his heart twisted. She was not what he expected. She didn't smile, didn't meet his eyes, didn't even speak. She only carried her box like it was the most important thing in the universe. "Lyra?" he asked softly, stepping forward. She gave the smallest nod, but did not lift her head. The coordinator handed over her papers, and just like that, she was his wife in the eyes of the program. No ceremony, no flowers, just signatures and silence. On the way to his home, Tarek tried to start conversations. "Long journey?" he asked. She nodded. "Hungry? I can make some stew." Another small nod. Every word he offered seemed to fall into an endless well. She gave back only what was necessary, never more. Her voice when it came was soft and quick, almost like she was afraid to be heard. Tarek wanted to ask about the box, but something about the way she held it stopped him. It wasn't just a box. It was her shield, her wall, her lifeline. He decided not to push. The house he had prepared for her was simple but clean. A miner's home, stone walls, wooden furniture, a warm fire in the hearth. He had even fixed up a small garden outside, hoping it might make her smile. But when she stepped inside, her eyes didn't linger on any of it. She went straight to the corner of the bedroom, placed the box beside the bed, and sat silently next to it as though nothing else mattered. Tarek watched her with a mix of confusion and worry. He had heard stories from other colonists. Some brides were shy at first, but in a week or two they warmed up. They laughed, asked questions, even teased their partners. But this woman seemed locked away. At dinner, she ate quietly, her eyes fixed on her food. Not once did she look at him. He wanted to tell her about his work, about the mines, about the stars that shone brighter here than anywhere else he had ever seen. But the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to reach her. That night, as he lay awake, he heard her shift in the next room. She wasn't sleeping either. He turned his head and saw the faint outline of her figure sitting beside the box, her hand resting on its lid. She sat like that for a long time, almost like she was guarding it. Tarek felt something stir inside him, not anger, not impatience, but a deep sadness. Whoever this woman was, she was wounded. Whatever was inside that box, it wasn't just belongings. It was her heart. He didn't know then, but that box would be the key to everything. For now, he only whispered into the darkness, though he knew she couldn't hear. "You're safe here." The first weeks were hard. Lyra lived in Tarek's home, but it didn't feel like she truly lived. She moved like a shadow, quiet and careful, never drawing attention. She did the chores silently, ate silently, and when night came, she sat beside her box like it was her only friend. The colony was small. Everyone knew when new brides arrived, and soon whispers started spreading. At the tavern, miners would nudge Tarek and ask, "Your human wife, does she talk at all?" "She talk at," others teased. Maybe she doesn't like you. Maybe humans are colder than they look. Tarek never answered them. He didn't laugh at their jokes. He only shrugged because he didn't know the truth himself. Lyra wasn't cruel. She wasn't angry. She was simply closed, like a door that refused to open. Tarek tried to be patient. He wasn't a man of many words either, but he had hoped for some warmth, some small sign of companionship. At dinner, he tried again and again. The stew is better with herbs. Want me to show you where they grow? She nodded but said nothing. Tomorrow, I'll work near the South Ridge. The crystals there catch the light like stars. You might like it. Her eyes flickered up for a moment but then dropped again. Every response was short, every moment quiet. Sometimes the silence in the house pressed against his chest until he felt he couldn't breathe. But Tarek noticed things. Small things. He noticed the way Lyra's hands shook whenever someone knocked at the door. He noticed how tightly she held the box whenever she carried it from one room to another. He noticed she never let it out of her sight, not even when she washed her face or cooked. It wasn't just a box. It was a part of her. One evening, he found her in the yard. The sun had set, painting the sky with deep purple and gold. She was sitting on the small bench he had built, her box beside her, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He stood in the doorway, unsure if he should disturb her. But then she spoke. So softly he almost thought he imagined it. It's quiet here. Tarek's heart jumped. It was the first time she had spoken without him asking something. He stepped outside, keeping his voice gentle. Yes. Too quiet sometimes. She didn't reply, but she didn't move away either. For Tarek, that was progress. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, carefully, she began to adjust to the rhythm of the colony. She walked with him to the markets, though she always stayed close and kept her eyes down. She helped plant vegetables in the garden. She even tried making bread, though it came out hard as stone and made them both laugh. Her laugh was so small, but to Tarek it was like music. Still, the wall around her remained. Every night she returned to the box. She would place her hand on it like one might touch a gravestone. Sometimes her shoulders trembled, but she never let the tears fall where he could see. Tarek longed to ask her what was inside. He longed to tell her she didn't need to carry it alone, but each time the words froze on his lips. He was afraid that pushing her would break what little trust she had given him. One night, a storm hit the colony. The wind howled against the windows, rattling them like angry fists. The rain poured so hard it drowned out even his thoughts. In the darkness, he heard movement. He rose from his bed and saw her sitting on the floor, clutching the box to her chest, rocking back and forth as though the storm outside was inside her too. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her it was only rain and wind. But something stopped him. He realized then her storm had nothing to do with the weather. It was inside her heart, and she had been fighting it alone for a very long time. The next morning, the sky was clear again, but the memory of her shaking figure haunted him. Tarek made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't just wait for her to open up. He would find a way to help her, not by force, not by questions, but by showing her every day that she was safe, that she wasn't alone anymore. What he didn't know was that the box she clung to so desperately held the key to everything. The silence, the fear, the pain, and soon, whether she wanted it or not, the box would bring them both face to face with the truth. The days grew longer. Spring settled over the colony, softening the edges of the harsh land. Flowers began to bloom in small patches near the fields, and the air was warmer, gentler. But inside Tarek's home there was still a different kind of winter, a silence that never truly left. Lyra was learning to live beside him. She cooked more often, spoke a little, and sometimes even asked questions about the mines. But when the evening came, when the light dimmed and the house grew quiet, she always went back to the same thing: the box. It sat at the edge of her bed, always within reach. She carried it if she stepped outside. She rested her hand on it when she thought no one was looking. It was not just wood and metal. It was something far heavier. Tarek respected her silence, but the sight of it weighed on him. He had never seen anyone hold on to something so tightly. One evening he found her in the small garden behind the house. She had taken the box outside and set it on her lap. Her head was bent low, her fingers trying to turn the lock. He saw the frustration in her face. Her hands trembled as she pulled at the lid, but it wouldn't open. Tarek stopped in the doorway, uncertain. For a long moment he watched. She was struggling, breathing fast, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Finally, he stepped forward and spoke, gently. "Do you need help?" Lyra froze. Her hands went still on the lock. She turned her head slightly, her hair hiding most of her face. For a moment he thought she would say no, like she always did. But then, after a long silence, she gave the smallest nod. Tarek knelt beside her. He didn't touch the box at once. Instead, he studied the old lock, noticing the rust, the way it had been damaged by travel and time. It was stubborn, but not impossible. He glanced at her. "May I?" Her eyes flickered to his, uncertain but trusting. She let go of the box slowly, as if handing him her very heart. Tarek's hands were rough and steady, trained by years of breaking stone. He worked carefully, using a small tool from his pocket, to press the lock. It resisted at first, but he was patient. Finally, with a sharp click, it gave way. The lid creaked open. Lyra gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly with tears as she looked inside. Tarek sat back, not daring to touch anything. He knew instinctively that this was not his to handle. Inside the box lay a collection of small, fragile treasures. A faded photograph of a family, 2 adults and a little girl smiling under a bright earth sky. A child's toy, a small stuffed bear worn down from love. A folded letter, the edges crumpled, the ink smudged with tears. And a necklace, simple but shining, clearly precious. Lyra reached for the photograph with trembling fingers. She held it close, her lips quivering as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Tarek stayed silent. He understood that sometimes words were not needed. He simply sat beside her, waiting, letting her decide what to share. Her voice finally broke the silence, soft and broken. "They're gone." The words cracked like thin glass. She clutched the picture tighter, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My family, my home, war took them. This is all I have left." Her shoulders shook as the truth spilled out of her chest. For weeks she had carried this grief alone, trapped inside her silence. The box was not just wood. It was her world, the last fragments of a life she could never return to. Tarek's chest ached. He had thought she was distant because she disliked him, because she did not want to be here. But now he understood. She wasn't cold. She was broken. And the box had been the only way she could keep the pieces of her heart together. He did not try to take the photo from her. He did not tell her to stop crying. Instead, he said the only thing that came to his heart: "You're not alone anymore." Lyra looked at him through blurred eyes, searching for something in his face. And for the first time since she arrived, she leaned against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, her tears soaking into his shirt. Tarek did not move. He did not push her away. He simply let her cry, his strong arm resting gently around her trembling form. It was not the end of her pain, but it was the beginning of something else. For the first time, the box had opened. Not just the wooden one, but the one around her heart. The night after the box was opened felt different. The air inside the house was no longer heavy with silence. It was filled with something softer, fragile, but real. Lyra had cried until her eyes were red and swollen, yet for the first time she had not cried alone. Tarek had not asked for details, but he knew that her broken words had carried weight. A whole world of pain had been hidden in that box. And now maybe she was ready to share more. The next morning he found her sitting at the table. She looked tired, her face pale, but her hands were steady as she traced the edges of the photograph she had taken from the box. When Tarek sat down across from her, she did something unexpected. She pushed the photo toward him. "This was my family," she whispered. Tarek leaned closer. The picture was faded, but the joy in it was still clear. A man and a woman stood with their arms around a young girl. They looked happy, alive. Lyra's voice trembled. "That's my father, my mother, and me." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "We lived near the city on Earth. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Then the war came. The sky burned, buildings fell, and people ran. We ran too, but we weren't fast enough." Her fingers clenched tightly around the photo. Her lips shook and her next words broke into sobs. "I was the only one who made it to the shelter. I never saw them again." Tarek's heart felt heavy. He reached across the table and placed his rough hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her shoulders trembled, but she kept speaking, her voice pouring out like a dam finally breaking. "The toy bear belonged to my little brother," she said, pointing to the small stuffed animal in the box. "He was only 6. He cried whenever he had to sleep without it. When I picked it up from the rubble, I thought I'd find him too. But I didn't." Her tears fell, staining the wooden table. She lifted the folded letter next. "This was from my mother. She wrote it before the war reached us," she said. "She said she was proud of me, that no matter what happened I had to keep living. But I didn't want to. I wanted to stay with them." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "They signed me up for the program before the war ended. They thought maybe if I went far away I'd be safe. They weren't wrong. But safety doesn't mean peace." Tarek listened in silence. He wasn't good with words, but he understood pain. He had lost people too. Friends in the mines, comrades in accidents, family he hadn't seen in years. But Lyra's grief was deeper, like a wound that never closed. When her sobs grew too strong, he stood and moved beside her. He didn't say it's all right because it wasn't. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her and held her until her body stopped shaking. She whispered into his chest, "I didn't want to come here. I didn't want to marry a stranger. I thought, if I stayed silent, if I hid, maybe I could keep the pain from swallowing me." Tarek stroked her hair gently, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not from me." That evening, she sat by the fire while he fixed a broken chair. For once, she didn't sit apart from him. She sat close, the box resting nearby, not clutched in her arms, but simply there. She asked him about his life, about the mines, about why he had chosen to bring a bride at all. He told her the truth. "I was lonely. I thought maybe having someone here would make the silence less heavy. I didn't know what kind of person I'd meet, but now, I think I was meant to meet you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes still red but softer than before. A faint smile touched her lips, small and uncertain but real. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't look like a shadow. She looked like a woman beginning to step back into the light. That night, as Tarek lay in bed, he thought of her words and her pain. He knew she wasn't healed. Wounds like hers didn't vanish in a day, but he also knew something else. She had finally trusted him with the truth. She had finally let someone see the pieces of her heart, and Tarek made a silent promise to himself. He would carry those pieces with her, no matter how heavy they were. After the night of truth, something inside Lyra changed. The silence that once filled the house was not so heavy anymore. She still carried her pain, but now it wasn't hidden behind locked doors. She had spoken it out loud, and in doing so, she had allowed Tarek to carry part of it with her. At first, the changes were small. She began to sit with him during meals, instead of rushing to finish and disappearing to her room. She asked him questions about the colony, about the people, even about the food they ate. Sometimes she even tried to help him cook, though more often than not she burned the bread or spilled the stew. But when her mistakes made her laugh, even for a moment, Tarek felt as if the entire house came alive. One morning, Tarek returned from the mines earlier than usual. The sun was bright and the air smelled fresh after a night of rain. As he walked toward his home, he stopped in surprise. There in the garden was Lyra. She was kneeling on the soil, her hands dirty, her face bent close to the plants. Beside her, the box rested in the grass, but for the first time, she wasn't holding it. Instead, she was planting flowers. When she noticed him, her face turned pink and she quickly looked down as if embarrassed. "I thought maybe the house would look nicer with colors," she said softly. Tarek smiled, his chest warm. "It already does," he replied. That day, he didn't go back to the mines. He stayed with her, helping plant small seeds and young blooms. They worked, side by side in the dirt, and for the first time they talked like old friends instead of strangers. Life slowly grew lighter. In the evenings, Tarek would tell her stories about the mines, how he and the other workers sometimes gave names to the tunnels, or how the crystals deep inside glowed like captured stars. Lyra listened closely, her eyes wide, her voice quiet but curious. Return, she began sharing more pieces of her past, not just the pain but also the good memories. She told him about the time her little brother had tried to climb a tree and gotten stuck, how her father had sung while working in the yard, how her mother had always made too much food just in case a neighbor stopped by. When she spoke of those memories, her face softened. The pain was still there, but it was surrounded by love. Tarek realized something then. Grief and love were two sides of the same coin. She held on to the box not only because of loss, but because it was the last piece of her family's love she could touch. One night, the colony held a gathering in the central square. Music played, people danced, and food was shared around fires. Tarek asked Lyra if she wanted to come. She hesitated, her hands tightening on the folds of her dress. Crowds still frightened her, but after a long pause, she nodded. The two of them walked together side by side. She stayed close to him, her eyes low, but the warmth of the fire and the laughter of children slowly eased her tension. At one point, a miner's wife handed Lyra a piece of sweetbread. Lyra accepted it with a small smile, and when she took a bite, her eyes lit up. It was the first time Tarek had seen her smile so openly, and it struck him like sunlight after endless night. That smile stayed in his mind for days. Later that week, as they sat near the fire in their home, Lyra surprised him again. She placed the box between them and slowly opened the lid. "This doesn't have to be mine alone anymore," she whispered. She showed him the letter, the toy, the necklace. She let him hold the stuffed bear, though her hands trembled as she passed it to him. Tarek cradled it carefully as if it were made of glass. "Thank you," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, thank you. For not forcing me. For waiting." That night, when Tarek lay awake, he thought of how far they had come. The woman who once hid behind silence now laughed, planted flowers, and even dared to face a crowd. She was still fragile, yes, but she was healing. And as he drifted to sleep, he realized something else. He had been searching for someone to end his loneliness, but what he found was something deeper. He found a woman who needed him as much as he needed her. Two broken souls, slowly mending together. The seasons changed slowly on the colony world. Harsh winds gave way to softer skies, and the fields outside Tarek's home began to glow with green. For the first time since Lyra arrived, the house no longer felt like a shell of stone and wood. It began to feel alive, like a real home. It was not just because of the flowers in the garden, though they bloomed bright and wild. It was not even the meals she cooked with careful hands. It was her voice, her laughter, her presence. Lyra was still quiet compared to others, but the silence between her and Tarek was no longer heavy. It was gentle, comfortable, like two people who did not need to fill every space with words. She would ask him small questions while he worked. Why do the crystals glow in the dark? Do the miners ever get lost underground? Which star is Earth? Tarek answered each question patiently, happy just to see her curiosity. And when he returned from the mines each evening, she would be waiting, not just with food, but with a softness in her eyes that made the day's wait disappear. The other colonists began to notice. At the markets, people whispered, "Have you seen Tarek's wife? She smiles now." They walk together like they've been married for years. Some were surprised, others simply nodded knowingly. They had seen the change too. The woman who once carried a box like a shield now carried herself with quiet strength. One afternoon, an older woman from the colony stopped Lyra in the square. She handed her a basket of fruit and said, "You look brighter, child. Keep holding on." Lyra had blushed, clutching the basket close. But that evening she told Tarek about it, and for the first time he saw her proud of herself. Their bond deepened through small moments. When a tool broke in the mine, Tarek came home frustrated. Instead of retreating, Lyra placed her hand gently on his arm and said, "You always fix things. You'll fix this too." It was a simple truth, but her faith in him made his anger fade. When she burned her hand while cooking, Tarek rushed to her side, cooling the skin with water and wrapping it in cloth. She had looked at him then with wide, tearful eyes, not just from the pain but from the way he cared. Neither of them spoke it yet, but the bond between them was no longer just necessity. It was something deeper, something that grew each day, like roots in the soil. One night the colony held another gathering. This time Lyra did not cling to the shadows. She walked beside Tarek, her head held higher than before. Music filled the square, and people danced in circles. Tarek never expected her to join, but when a kind neighbor offered her a hand, Lyra hesitated only for a moment before stepping into the dance. Her movements were uncertain, but when she looked back at Tarek, she laughed, a sound clear and full carrying across the firelight. Tarek stood watching, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not relief, something softer, something he dared not name yet. Later, as they walked home beneath the stars, Lyra spoke softly. "I thought I'd never laugh again. I thought I'd never feel alive again." Tarek looked at her, his rough voice steady. "You're stronger than you know." She shook her head. "No. I only started to heal because you gave me space. You gave me time." He wanted to tell her that she gave him just as much, that her presence had filled the emptiness inside him, that her smile was worth more than all the crystals in the mines. But the words stayed in his heart. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand. And when she squeezed back, it said everything. That night, when the fire burned low, Lyra opened the box again, but this time, she did not cry. She took out the necklace and held it up to the light. "It was my mother's," she said quietly. "I want to wear it again." Tarek nodded. "You should." When she placed the necklace around her neck, her face shone in the glow of the fire. She no longer looked like the broken girl who arrived clutching a box. She looked like a woman reclaiming her life. The house was no longer silent. The box was no longer just sorrow. They were building something new together, brick by brick, smile by smile. And deep in his heart, Tarek knew this was only the beginning. The colony's summer arrived, bringing warm winds that carried the smell of growing fields and wild blossoms. Life in the outpost was still hard. Miners still dug through stone, storms still came without warning. But for Tarek and Lyra, life no longer felt empty. Their house was different now. It was no longer just walls and stone. It was filled with laughter, with voices, with small touches of life that made it a home. The flowers Lyra had planted bloomed in the yard, bright colors dancing against the gray soil. The neighbors often paused to admire them, saying the house looked alive now. Tarek always smiled when he heard that. He knew it wasn't the flowers that made the house alive. It was her. One evening, after a long day in the mines, Tarek came home to find Lyra waiting by the door. She wasn't holding the box anymore. Instead, she carried a small basket of bread she had baked, her cheeks flushed with pride. "I wanted to try again," she said with a shy smile. "This time, It didn't burn. He took a piece, bit into it, and nodded. Better than any bread in the colony. Her laugh filled the room, soft but sure. And Tarek realized, not for the first time, how much he loved that sound. That night after dinner, Lyra brought the box to the fire. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the familiar treasures. But her eyes were different now, no longer only filled with pain. "Tarek," she whispered, lifting the photograph. "I'll always carry them in my heart. But I think they would want me to keep living, not just remembering." Tarek's throat tightened. He leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "They'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you." Her eyes glistened with tears. But this time they were not only tears of grief, they were tears of release. She closed the box gently and set it aside, not in her lap, not clutched in her arms, but resting peacefully by the fire. For the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to let it go. The following days brought more change. Lyra began to walk through the colony without fear. She helped the women in the market, carried baskets of food, and even joined in conversations. She still spoke softly, but her words carried strength. The colonists noticed the transformation and welcomed her warmly. Children ran to her garden to see the flowers, and she showed them how to care for plants. She even began teaching one of the miners' daughters how to bake bread. For Tarek, watching her grow was like watching the sunrise after a long, endless night. Each step she took into the light filled him with a pride so deep it almost hurt. One evening, as the two of them stood on the ridge overlooking the mines, the stars shone brighter than ever. Lyra slipped her hand into his, her fingers warm against his calloused skin. "Do you know," she said softly, "when I first came here, I thought my life had ended. I thought I would never smile again. But you helped me open more than just a box." Tarek turned to her, his rough face softened by the starlight. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, her eyes glimmering. "You helped me open my heart." The word struck him harder than any stone ever had. For a moment he could not speak. Then, without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist. She melted against him, her face pressed to his chest, and in that embrace everything felt whole. The box still sat in their home. Sometimes she opened it, sometimes she didn't, but it was no longer a cage for her heart. It was simply a memory, a part of her past that she could carry without fear. One morning she placed the necklace her mother had given her around her neck and smiled at her reflection. Then she turned to Tarek and whispered, "I want to live, again, with you." Tarek said nothing, but the way he looked at her, the strength in his eyes, the love unspoken yet clear, was more than enough. In the vast galaxy, where so many lives were lost and broken, two souls had found each other. Not because of chance, not because of duty, but because they had chosen to stay, to heal, to love. And it had all begun with a box.